Let me tell you something about the Interstellar Combat Academy on Vorath. It is not a school. Not in the way most civilized species use the word. Schools have soft lights, safe chairs, guidance offices, and instructors who pretend failure is part of growth. The Combat Academy has flickering battle lamps, metal corridors that smell like burned armor, and a medical wing that keeps stretchers beside the training arenas because walking there yourself is considered optimistic planning. The academy sits on the edge of the Vorath Highlands, where the wind comes in sideways and the cold gets into your bones like it has a personal grievance. The building itself is enormous. Sharp black metal. Angled towers. Training domes buried half into the rock. Observation platforms hanging over live fire pits. Whoever designed it clearly believed architecture should threaten students before instructors got the chance. They succeeded. I am saying this as someone who had to walk through those doors every morning and pretend I was emotionally prepared. I was not. My name is Ven Sorath. Junior Cadet. Second-year Tactical Evaluation Student. Thuvari species. And unwilling witness to the day the entire academy learned it had been measuring humans wrong. At the time, of course, I did not know that. None of us did. We only knew the academy was where every serious military family, coalition force, planetary guard, and ambitious young warrior sent their best. The Krellians came with their perfect memory systems and six-jointed limbs, capable of recalling every combat form ever recorded and looking personally offended when someone forgot a regulation number. The Moradins arrived in packs, heavy-built and broad, with warrior-cast confidence and shoulders designed by evolution to make hallways feel narrower. The Thuvari were tall, pale, and deeply serious about everything, including meal portions, tactical silence, and the emotional dishner of late assignments. The Drex twins moved like one nervous system had been installed into two bodies and then encouraged to become a problem. Then there were the instructors. Most of them were terrifying in ordinary professional ways. Old battlefield records. Cold voices. Enough scars to prove they had survived things they were not interested in describing. They walked through the academy and cadets stepped aside automatically, the same way you step aside for a heavy machine rolling downhill. But Professor Kilos was different. Professor Kilos did not belong in the same category as the others. He was Verati, which meant he stood close to 3 meters tall and looked like someone had built a creature out of dense structural muscle, combat memory, and bad news. His skin was deep gray, marked with darker layered patterns across the neck and shoulders. Among Verati, those patterns meant extensive combat history. On Kilos, they overlapped twice. That was not decoration. That was a warning label. His eyes were actual gold. Not poetic gold. Gold. And they moved independently, which meant he could watch 2 cadets at once while making both feel like they had already disappointed him. He had 12 confirmed kills in active service. Nobody knew that because he said it. Everyone knew it because the academy knew everything worth fearing. His class was called Practical Combat Engagement. The course description made it sound almost reasonable. A hands-on approach to real-world threat neutralization across species-specific combat scenarios. That was academic language. The honest version would have been shorter. You will be placed near something dangerous and asked to make better decisions than panic. Every semester, a new group of cadets read that description and thought, how bad can it be? This is one of the most reliable ways young people become statistics. I was one of those cadets. There were 31 of us that semester. 28 were exactly what one would expect from an elite combat academy. Physically impressive. Highly trained. Aggressively self-aware of their own rankings. The Moradins took up an entire side of the room and somehow made the furniture look temporary. The Krellians sat perfectly straight with tablets aligned at identical angles. The Drex twins did not speak, but occasionally turned their heads at the same time, which made everyone near them uncomfortable. And then there were the humans. 3 of them. They sat near the middle of the room. That bothered me immediately. Most species choose the back on the first day of a class like Kilos's. Distance is not true protection, but fear often accepts symbolic gestures. The humans chose the middle. Either they were strategically visible, socially unaware, or possessed some uniquely human misunderstanding of danger. I could not tell. That bothered me more. The first human was Doyle Francus. Large by human standards. Broad shoulders. Thick arms. A face that looked permanently skeptical, as if the universe had personally lied to him several times and he was still waiting for an apology. He sat with his arms crossed and gave the front of the room the expression of someone already unimpressed by future events. The second was Petra Voss. Shorter. Sharper. Always moving slightly, even when still. One finger tapped against her knee in a rhythm so precise that I suspected it meant something. Petra looked like the sort of person who calculated exits before greetings. I respected that. Then there was Narration. And this is where everyone made the mistake. Mera did not look dangerous. That is not an insult. It is simply what we saw. Medium height for a human, which meant short compared to most of the class. Slim. Dark hair tied back without style. Brown eyes. Quiet posture. No dramatic stillness. No predator confidence. No obvious nervous energy. She just sat there. Settled. As if she had already accepted whatever the day intended to do and was waiting for it to reveal itself. The Moradin cadets looked at the humans and whispered something in their own tongue. I understood enough to translate. They said the humans looked like they had entered the wrong building. No one corrected them. Not Doyle. Not Petra. Not Mera. Mera did not even glance over. She opened her notebook. Paper. Actual paper. In a room full of smart tablets, neural slates, and memory-linked devices, Narration took notes by hand. That made the Krellians notice her for exactly 3 seconds, classify the behavior as inefficient, and then apparently dismiss her forever. This would later become embarrassing for them. Then the room changed. Not because anyone announced it. Because Professor Kilos walked in. 31 cadets went silent so quickly the ventilation system became audible. Kilos stood at the front and looked at us. He did not introduce himself. He did not smile. He simply took inventory. One gold eye moved across the Moradins. The other moved across the humans. I personally felt examined in 2 places at once, which is impressive because neither eye was aimed directly at me. Finally, he spoke. You are here because your respective academies, governments, clans, fleets, or families believe you have potential. He paused. Kilos used pauses the way some species use knives. I do not yet share that belief. No one moved. Welcome to practical combat engagement. That was the first day. Nothing violent happened. No one was injured. No walls were dented. And yet somehow, by the end of that first lecture, every cadet understood that survival in this class would not be guaranteed by size, species, rank, or reputation. At least, we thought we understood. We were wrong. Because at that point, every visible hierarchy in the room still seemed intact. Moradins were the strongest. Krellians were the most precise. Drex twins were the most coordinated. Professor Kilos was the monster at the top. And the humans? The humans were interesting, but unproven. Doyle looked stubborn. Petra looked sharp. Mera looked like background. That was the file most of us placed her in. Quiet. Unremarkable. Possibly diligent. Probably not a threat. It is important that you understand this. The Academy did not underestimate Mera because we were stupid. We underestimated her because every measurement we trusted told us to. And the most dangerous failures begin exactly there. Not with ignorance. With confidence in the wrong data. The first 2 weeks of practical combat engagement were theory. I know that sounds safer than live combat. It was not. It was safer in the same way standing outside a burning building is safer than standing inside it. Technically correct, but still deeply uncomfortable when Professor Kilos is the one explaining the fire. He did not teach like other instructors. Other instructors gave definitions, examples, diagrams, and the comforting illusion that if you memoized enough information, reality might behave politely when it tried to kill you. Kilos did not believe in that illusion. He would present a scenario, let the class build a response, then dismantle that response with the calm efficiency of a surgeon removing infected tissue. A Moradin cadet once proposed a frontal dominance maneuver against a multi-limbed predator species. Kilos listened. Then he displayed the predator's tendon structure, reaction timing, bite radius, and historical kill pattern. The Moradin's plan lasted 12 seconds on the simulation model. The cadet lasted considerably longer under the embarrassment, which I respected. The Krellians performed best on paper. That surprised no one. They remembered everything. Every angle. Every protocol. Every classification table. If the universe ever decided to attack someone in alphabetical order, the Krellians would be nearly unbeatable. But Kelos kept reminding them that memory was not adaptation. Knowing what happened before, he said, is not the same as surviving what happens next. The Krellians disliked that. They disliked most things that could not be indexed. The humans were more difficult to classify. Doyle Francis struggled with the mathematical response models. Not badly enough to fail, but visibly enough that the Krellians noticed and the Moradins smirked. Doyle responded to this by working harder with the expression of a man silently arguing with every number on the page. He stayed after class twice. Asked blunt questions. Got blunt answers. Returned the next day improved. That was irritatingly respectable. Petra Voss was faster. Not physically, though she was that too. Mentally. She absorbed threat maps like she was building three-dimensional models inside her skull. She asked questions that went directly under the obvious problem and found the structural weakness beneath it. Once, during a lesson on enclosed space engagement, she asked whether a retreat corridor should be treated as an escape route or bait if the enemy species was known to use predictive herding. Professor Kelos stopped for 1 second before answering. 1 second from Kelos was not much. But it was something. Every cadet noticed. Petra's finger tapped against her knee afterward, faster than usual. I think she was pleased. Narration remained quiet. That was how the class misread her. Doyle was visibly stubborn. Petra was visibly sharp. Mera was simply there. She arrived early, sat in the middle rows, opened her paper notebook, and wrote by hand. She did not compete for attention. She did not perform confidence. She did not challenge anyone. She did not even react when the Moradins made jokes about humans needing padded helmets for theory days. She just wrote. At first, I assumed she was overwhelmed. That was reasonable. Many students become quiet when the material becomes difficult. But then I noticed her notebook. I did not mean to. I was seated 2 rows behind and slightly left of her, which gave me a clear view when she turned pages. I notice things. This is both my strength and the reason I require calming tea more often than my physician recommends. Mera's notes were not messy. They were not desperate. They were not the notes of someone trying to survive information overload. They were structured. First pass, concept. Second line, application. Third line, failure condition. Margin, what changes under stress. That last part bothered me. Most cadets wrote down what the instructor said. Mera wrote down when it would stop being true. During the lecture on predator charge behavior, Kelos explained that most large non-sentient combat organisms commit to initial momentum if prey response stays within expected retreat patterns. Everyone wrote that down. Mera wrote something else below it. Expected retreat creates expected predator path. Then she underlined predator path. Twice. I remember that because at the time I thought it was an unusual emphasis. Later, I realized I had watched her load the weapon before I knew there was going to be a fight. The Moradins did not notice. They had already sorted the humans. Doyle was the strong one. Petra was the quick one. Mera was the quiet one. That was the social classification, and species at academies love classifications because they make the world feel manageable. The Krellians classified her differently, but not better. Low verbal contribution. Non-optimized note-taking technology. Average visible musculature. No dominant social positioning. Estimated combat relevance, limited. I know this because Krellians speak quietly, but not quietly enough if you have Thuvari auditory range and unhealthy curiosity. Mera heard them. I am certain she did. She was 3 seats away. Her hearing was not the issue. She simply gave no sign the judgment mattered. That unsettled me more than if she had been offended. Offense is understandable. Indifference is data. By the end of the 2nd week, the academy had built its opinion. Doyle might endure. Petra might surprise. Mera would probably perform adequately and disappear into the middle rankings. No one expected much more. Not the Moridans. Not the Krellians. Not the Tavari. Not even Doyle, I think. He treated Mera kindly, but in the casual way one treats someone familiar and harmless. Petra watched her more closely, though. I noticed that too. Petra's eyes followed Mera whenever Kilos discussed adaptive behavior, pain response, or biological panic thresholds. At the time, I thought Petra was simply protective of another human. Now I suspect she knew something the rest of us did not. Humans are very good at appearing ordinary around each other. This is rude of them. It creates classification errors. The final theory session ended with Professor Kilos displaying a rotating image of a six-limbed predator skeleton. He did not identify it. Not yet. He simply asked what we saw. The Moridans saw mass. The Krellians saw limb advantage. The Tavari saw armor geometry. The Drex twins saw rotational speed potential. Petra saw low center momentum transfer. Doyle saw, in his own words, something I do not want indoors. That was honest and therefore useful. Then Kilos looked at Mera. Cadet Shin. Every head turned. Mera looked up from her paper notebook. What do you see? She studied the image for 3 seconds. Not long. Not dramatic. Then she said, it turns faster than its size suggests. Kilos's gold eyes fixed on her. Yes. She continued, almost to herself. So the mistake is not distance. The mistake is predictable distance. The room became slightly quieter. Kilos said nothing for a moment. Mera added one more line. If it knows where fear sends you, it already knows where to hit. That was the first time I saw Professor Kilos look at her differently. Only slightly. A fraction of a fraction. But enough. Then he turned off the display. Next session, he said, we leave theory. No one spoke. That sentence had weight. Everyone knew what came after theory in practical combat engagement. Assessment. Arena work. Live threat simulation. Sometimes, if Kilos was feeling especially committed to ruining digestion, live organism engagement. As the class stood to leave, the Moridan cadet nearest me muttered that at least the humans would finally learn the difference between notes and violence. Mera closed her notebook. Carefully. Calmly. She placed her pen inside the binding loop. Then she walked out with Doyle and Petra as if nothing important had happened. But I stayed in my seat for a moment longer. Because something was bothering me. Narration had not spoken like someone guessing. She had spoken like someone remembering. That was absurd, of course. The predator skeleton was not from Earth. The threat model was classified. The course had not yet moved into live assessment. There was no reason for one quiet human cadet to understand the mistake before everyone else. No reason at all. Unless the mistake was not about that predator. Unless Mera had learned it somewhere else. Somewhere older. Somewhere meaner. Somewhere that had been teaching her long before Vorif ever got the chance. I looked down at my own notes. For the first time in 2 weeks, they felt insufficient. The next session was 3 days away. I spent those 3 days thinking about Professor Kilos's final words. We leave theory. Most of the class heard that as a warning. Narration, I would later understand, heard it as an invitation. The 3rd week began with Professor Kilos walking into the classroom and saying 4 words. Live assessment today. That was all. No introduction. No review. No comforting transition from theory to practice. Just 4 words dropped into the room like a weapon placed on a table. 31 cadets reacted in 31 different ways, but somehow all of them meant the same thing. Fear. The Moridans went still, which was how their species handled surprise when pride prevented honesty. The Krellians immediately opened their notes, not because they needed to read them, but because perfect memory apparently still enjoys pretending. The Tavari exchanged one slow look that translated across species as professional regret. Doyle Francus uncrossed his arms, looked at the ceiling, and then crossed them again in the opposite direction. Petra's tapping finger stopped. That was how I knew it was serious. As for Narration, she simply finished the line she had been writing, placed her pen inside her notebook, and looked up. No alarm. No excitement. No visible dread. Just attention. Professor Kilos stood at the front of the room, his gold eyes moving independently across us. The theoretical portion of this course is complete, he said. You have written responses. You have solved models. You have explained survival on paper. A pause. Kilos had weaponized silence before most of us had learned to use forks properly. Today, we see what remains true when something is trying to hurt you. No one laughed. Not even nervously. The Academy maintains several controlled combat organisms for assessment purposes. Today, one will be released into Arena 4. One cadet will enter. The objective is not extermination. The objective is engagement, control, and survival. He let that settle. Time limit, 8 minutes. 8 minutes sounded short in conversation. In an arena with a live combat organism, 8 minutes sounded like an unusually detailed death sentence. Professor Kilos clasped his hands behind his back. I will take one volunteer. The room became deeply interested in the floor. I have never seen so many elite cadets simultaneously discover humility. The Moridans, who had spent 2 weeks radiating eagerness to fight anything with a pulse, suddenly looked like philosophers contemplating nonviolence. The Krellians reviewed their notes with such intensity that I briefly wondered if one of them intended to hide inside the tablet. The Drex twins both developed a synchronized cough. Doyle looked as if he was considering volunteering out of pure stubbornness, then reconsidering because stubbornness and suicidal stupidity were cousins but not identical twins. Petra stared straight ahead, her finger still motionless. Mera did not move. Professor Kilos began walking between the desks. Slowly. This was not necessary. He could have asked again from the front. But Kilos understood pressure. Pressure revealed structure. He passed the Moridan row. No volunteer. He passed the Krellians. No volunteer. He passed the Tavari. No volunteer. He passed me. I looked directly forward and made a private agreement with every organ in my body not to draw attention. Then Kilos reached the humans. Doyle's jaw flexed. Petra's eyes tracked the professor. Narration raised her hand. Not dramatically. Not with a speech. Not with the stiff courage of someone forcing herself through terror. She raised her hand the way one raises a hand to ask whether a door should be pushed or pulled. Calm. Simple. Done. The room did not go quiet. Quiet had already happened. This was different. This was 30 cadets stopping every small biological process they had been pretending not to have. Breaths paused. Fingers froze. A Moridan's mandible stopped halfway through a nervous shift. Even the Krellians abandoned the theater of note review. Professor Kilos stopped. For 4 seconds, he said nothing. I need you to understand what that meant. Variety officers do not pause because they are slow. Professor Kilos certainly did not pause because he needed time to think. He paused because for the first time since the semester began, something had happened outside his prediction map. 4 seconds from Kilos was not silence. It was a crack in reality. Cadet Shin, he said. Yes, Professor. You are volunteering for the live assessment. Yes, Professor. You understand the parameters. Yes, Professor. You understand the organism will not be adjusted to accommodate human physical limitations. Yes, Professor. Doyle turned his head slightly. His expression had changed from skepticism to something like deeply respectful concern. Petra did not look at Mera. She looked at Kilos. That was interesting. Very interesting. As if she was waiting to see whether the professor understood what had just walked into his arena. Kilos studied Mera for another 2 seconds. Then he nodded once. Report to Arena 4 at 3rd bell. Yes, Professor. Mera lowered her hand. That was it. No announcement. No visible fear. No dramatic preparation. She simply opened her notebook again, as if volunteering to face a live combat organism had been an item on a schedule. The class remained frozen around her. Professor Kilos returned to the front. For the rest of you, observation is mandatory. You will submit analysis after the assessment. The bell eventually released us, though released is too generous a word. We moved like prisoners being politely transferred. The walk to Arena 4 was unlike any academy walk I had experienced. Usually, cadets filled corridors with quiet competition. Posture. Side glances. Subtle rank displays. Complaints disguised as tactical commentary. Not this time. This time, everyone walked in a shared silence that had no clear owner. The Moridans kept looking at Mera and then looking away. The Krellians were clearly recalculating something. Doyle walked on one side of her. Petra on the other. Mera walked between them, steady and ordinary, which somehow made the situation worse. Arena 4 waited below the eastern combat wing. It was circular, high-ceilinged, and built with padded lower walls, reinforced barriers, and an observation rail surrounding the upper level. The floor was sealed gray material designed for traction, impact resistance, and easy cleaning. The last part bothered me most. There were 2 gates. One for the cadet. One for the organism. Mera entered through the cadet gate in a standard training suit. No armor beyond course regulation. No extra equipment. No weapon. Nothing. She walked to the center of the arena and looked around as if studying a room she had been asked to repair. Not afraid. Assessing. Doyle gripped the observation rail beside me. He would deny it if anyone asked. Petra stood perfectly still. Professor Kilos watched from the opposite side of the rail, face unreadable. Then the creature gate began to open. The sound was heavy. Mechanical locks withdrawing one by one. A low growl rolled through the arena before anything emerged. Not loud at first. Deep. Physical. The kind of sound that made your bones aware they were temporary. Then the Gorath stepped out. I had read the files. Everyone had. A lower jungle predator from Dresser 4. 6 limbs. Lead armor plates. Multiple sensory organs. Extreme aggression toward movement, sound, unfamiliar scent, and, according to one incident report, reflective surfaces. 12 cadets hospitalized in 4 years. 1 Moridan thrown hard enough into the wall padding that the padding had to be replaced. That description had seemed severe on paper. In person, it seemed like an apology for not being severe enough. The Gorath was massive. 2 meters at the shoulder, nearly 4 when it reared. Its plated hide caught the battle lights in dull, ugly flashes. Each step landed with enough weight to make the sealed floor vibrate through the observation rail and into my hands. Its sensory cluster turned toward Mera. All 4 organs oriented at once. The arena felt smaller. Narration stood in the center. Small. Still. Human. The Gorath lowered its body. Professor Kilos said nothing. No instruction. No final warning. The timer activated above the arena. 8 minutes. The Gorath charged. Not a test. Not a warning rush. A full, committed, floor-shaking charge directly at the quiet human who had raised her hand. Every cadet at the rail leaned forward or backward depending on species instinct. Mera moved. But not away. That was the first impossible thing. She stepped slightly to the side. And then toward it. Narration moved toward the Gorath. That detail matters. Most species retreat when something larger charges them. It is not cowardice. It is biology making a reasonable argument. When a 6-limbed predator with armored plates, multispectrum sensory organs, and a recorded history of putting cadets into medical recovery comes at you like a falling building, the body makes several suggestions. Run. Freeze. Climb. Scream internally. Occasionally externally. Mera did none of those things. She moved 1 step sideways, then slightly forward, placing herself near the edge of the Gorath's expected impact path instead of outside it completely. Doyle made a sound beside me. Not a word. More like the noise pressure systems make before safety valves become relevant. The Gorath passed her by a margin so small my nervous system filed a complaint. Its leading limb tore through the space where her chest had been less than a breath earlier. The air pressure alone shoved her shoulder back, and I saw her boot skid half an inch on the sealed arena floor. She did not fall. The Gorath slammed past, claws scraping deep lines into the gray surface, then turned. Fast. Too fast. Every report had mentioned the turning speed. Every briefing had warned us that its size created false confidence because the creature rotated with horrifying efficiency. Reading that sentence in a file was one thing. Watching that much muscle and armor whip around toward a human cadet was another. Mera was already moving before the turn completed. That was the second impossible thing. She had not dodged randomly. She had measured. Her head tracked the creature's shoulder line, limb placement, sensory cluster angle, and floor contact rhythm. I could see it suddenly. Not because I understood her. Because I understood analysis. Mera was not watching the Goroth like prey. She was watching it like a machine with habits. The second charge came at an altered angle. That alone shocked half the class. The Goroth was not intelligent in any academic sense, but it adapted enough to punish repeated movement. If Mera had used the same dodge twice, it would have crushed her against the wall. She did not. This time she waited longer. Far too long. The Moridin beside me whispered, "Too late." It was not too late. It was almost too late. Which, as I later learned, is where humans sometimes choose to live. Mera dropped her center of gravity at the final instant and slid under the leading limb as the Goroth's mass rolled over her position. Her left shoulder struck the floor. Hard. She used the impact instead of fighting it, rolled through, came up behind the creature, and hit it. Not wildly. Not desperately. One short, sharp forearm strike to the lower sensory cluster. The exact region Professor Keelos had shown in the skeleton model. Between the third and fourth sensory organs. Highest nerve density. Low armor overlap. Difficult access point. I remembered the notes. So did she. The Goroth did not collapse. Of course it did not. That would have been too convenient, and the universe is rarely generous during combat assessments. But it stumbled. Just once. A half-step disruption in a creature that had previously seemed like weather given a skeleton. Every cadet at the rail reacted. A collective intake. A shift. A ripple through 30 bodies recalculating at once. Professor Keelos did not move. That made it worse. He was watching with complete attention now. Mera circled. Not fast enough to look impressive. Fast enough to stay inconvenient. The Goroth reoriented, its sensory organs twitching in separate directions, trying to lock her movement pattern. Mera kept changing rhythm. 2 slow steps. 1 quick. Pause. Angle. Breath. The creature lowered again. 3rd charge. This one connected. Its leading limb caught her across the midsection and threw her sideways. There was no elegance in it. No heroic spin. No controlled roll. She hit the sealed floor, slid 12 feet, and slammed into the padded wall hard enough to leave a dent. The sound ended the entire observation rail. No one breathed. Doyle's hands tightened on the barrier. Petra's expression did not change, but her eyes sharpened in a way that made me think she had stopped watching the fight and started watching Mera's recovery. Mera lay still for 1 second. Then 2. The timer kept running. 7 minutes, 12 seconds. 7 minutes, 11. 7 minutes, 10. A Moridin exhaled. It is over. Mera got up. Not dramatically. Not quickly. Not with some triumphant surge of impossible energy. She got up like getting up was simply the next task on a list, and the list had not asked for her opinion. One hand pressed briefly against her ribs. Her breathing had changed. Sharper. Controlled, but damaged. She rolled her left shoulder. Blood marked one corner of her mouth. Then she looked at the Goroth again. And started making sound. At first, I thought she was speaking. She was not. There were no words. It was low. Steady. A layered vocal pattern, rising and dropping in subtle intervals. Not loud enough to intimidate. Not soft enough to signal retreat. Her posture changed with it. Hands low. Shoulders angled. Eyes fixed, but not challenging in the way most predator species read as direct threat. It was the strangest thing I had ever seen in a combat arena. Narration was communicating with a creature that did not use language. Or more precisely, she was interfering with how it interpreted her. Professor Keelos leaned forward by perhaps 1 centimeter. From him, that was practically a public emotional collapse. The Goroth's 4th charge began slower. Not slow. Never slow. But slower. Its sensory cluster moved uncertainly for the first time, tracking sound, posture, and motion that did not fit the prey patterns it had learned to punish. Mera kept making that low vocal rhythm. She shifted left. Then did not move left. The Gorith adjusted early. Wrong. Mera stepped inside the limb path. Every intelligent part of my mind objected. She took the hit along her back and shoulder instead of her center mass, letting the force turn her body into the creature's underside. Pain crossed her face for half a second. Then disappeared behind focus. She struck the same nerve junction. Once. Twice. A third time. The Gorith lurched. Mera's knees almost buckled. She drove a fourth strike upward with everything left in her right arm. The sound was not loud. But every cadet heard it. A dense, ugly impact into living structure. The Gorith's front limbs failed. Not completely. Not permanently. But enough. The creature dropped. Its armored body slammed into the arena floor with a force that shook the rail beneath my hands. Plates rattled. Sensory organs folded inward. 6 limbs spasmed for balance and found none. For one impossible moment, the most dangerous organism in the academy was down. And Narration was still standing. Barely. But standing. The timer read 5 minutes and 40 seconds. 5 minutes and 40 seconds. She had not survived 8 minutes. She had ended the assessment early. No one spoke. Doyle was staring with both hands on his head now, his skepticism completely destroyed. Petra smiled. Small. Private. Not surprised. That smile bothered me more than the Gorith falling. Because it suggested Petra had not been hoping Mera could do this. She had been waiting for everyone else to find out. Professor Kilos moved. He descended from the observation level without hurry, crossed the arena floor, and passed the recovering Gorith without looking at it. That was a statement. In Verati body language, ignoring a threat meant the threat was no longer the most important thing in the room. He stopped before Mera. The height difference between them was ridiculous. He looked like a war monument. She looked like a bruised human cadet trying not to sway. Cadet Shin, he said. Professor. How many times have you done this before? Mera blinked once. Done what? Kilos gestured toward the Gorith. This. She considered the question. Not this exactly. The class stayed silent. Mera wiped blood from her eyebrow with the back of one hand. Different animals. Same general situation. Kilos's gold eyes fixed on her. Where? Mera answered simply. Earth. The word moved through the arena like a new classification being born. Kilos was silent for 4 seconds. Again. Then he said, Earth does not have organisms at this threat classification. Mera looked up at him, bruised, bleeding, breathing hard, and completely calm. With respect, Professor. She glanced once at the Gorith, which was now slowly pushing itself back onto unstable limbs. Then she finished. Earth has organisms that make this one look like a starting point. Nobody knew what to do with that sentence. Not immediately. That was the strange part. If Narration had said it loudly, maybe the class could have dismissed it as arrogance. If she had said it with a smile, maybe the Moradans could have called it human theatrics. If she had said it while standing over the Gorith like a conqueror, perhaps Professor Kilos would have corrected her for emotional exaggeration. But she did not. She said it calmly. Respectfully. Almost clinically. Earth has organisms that make this one look like a starting point. The Gorith behind her was still recovering, its 6 limbs flexing unevenly as academy handlers prepared containment fields. It was not weak. It was not harmless. It was not suddenly less terrifying because Mera had put it on the floor. And that was exactly why her sentence landed so heavily. She was not saying the Gorith was nothing. She was saying humans came from a world where danger was normal enough to become education. Professor Kilos stared down at her. His independent gold eyes did not move for once. Both were fixed on Mera. That, I later learned, was extremely rare for a Verati of his age and training. When both eyes focused on one subject, it meant the subject had become worth full attention. Explain, he said. Mera took one breath. Her ribs clearly disliked that decision. She still answered. Earth predators don't all match this size class, Professor. But classification misses behavior. Ambush predators. Pack hunters. Constrictors. Venomous species. Pursuit animals. Territorial megafauna. Marine predators large enough to attack vessels. Small organisms toxic enough to kill through skin contact. Microbial threats that outperformed most visible predators for millions of years. The arena stayed silent. She wiped blood from her eyebrow again. Earth didn't produce one category of danger. It produced overlapping categories. Size, speed, venom, camouflage, endurance, infection, environmental pressure. Humans learned pattern recognition because we had to. A Krellian near me whispered, "That is not in the Academy summary." Petra heard him. Her smile sharpened. "No," she said quietly. "It usually isn't." Professor Keelos did not look away from Mera. "And this," he said, gesturing toward the Goroth again, "was familiar." Mera shook her head. "No. The body structure was new. The sensory layout was new. The mass distribution was unpleasant." That was the first time Doyle made a sound that might have been a laugh, though he looked too horrified to enjoy it. Mera continued. "But the problem was familiar." "What problem?" "Large predator. Charge-based engagement. Momentum commitment. Sensory overload points. Pain response without emotional bargaining." That last phrase made Keelos narrow his eyes slightly. Pain response without emotional bargaining. Mera nodded. "If I stopped every time my body said stop, I'd have stopped during the first pass." Every cadet heard that. Every cadet understood it differently. For Moridans, pain was a dominance test. For Krellians, pain was data corruption. For Tavari, pain was a threshold indicator. For most species, pain meant change course immediately. For Mera, apparently, pain was information. Not permission. That distinction unsettled me more than the fight. Because during the assessment, I had thought she was enduring punishment through courage. Now I understood that was too simple. She had not ignored pain. She had used it. The shoulder impact told her how close the Goroth's pressure wave carried. The rib hit told her the limb angle. The back strike told her how much force she could absorb without losing access to the nerve junction. Every injury had become measurement. I did not enjoy realizing that. Professor Keelos turned slightly toward the observation rail. "Class," he said. Every cadet straightened. Not because he ordered us to. Because survival instincts recommended it. What did Cadet Shin do incorrectly? The question was horrifying. Mera had just dropped the Goroth in 5 minutes and 40 seconds, and Keelos was asking for errors. The Moridans looked suddenly grateful they had not volunteered. The Krellians recovered first, because they were built for academic traps. One raised a hand. She permitted unnecessary contact during the third and fourth engagements. Keelos nodded. "Correct. Why?" The Krellian paused. Insufficient physical speed to fully evade. Mera did not react. Keelos's eyes moved. Partially correct. Cadet Shin lacked the speed to evade fully and still reach the target point. She chose controlled contact over uncontrolled retreat. Controlled contact. That phrase entered my notes so hard my stylus nearly cracked. Keelos looked to the Moridan row. "Another error." One Moridan cadet answered carefully. "She engaged too close to the primary limb path." "Correct. Why?" The Moridan hesitated. "To access the nerve junction." "Correct. She accepted proximity because the target required it. Risk was not absent. It was purchased. Risk was purchased. Another phrase for the notes. Then Keelos looked back at Mera. "What was your largest mistake?" Mera answered immediately. "I underestimated the recovery speed after the third charge." Keelos's mouth did not move, but somehow the room understood he approved. "Yes." He turned to us again. "She is correct. The third impact should have ended the assessment. Not because the strike was decisive, but because it created the first true disorder in her breathing, posture, and response timing." Mera looked slightly annoyed at herself. That was also unsettling. Kelos continued. Most of you saw the creature hit her. You thought the question became whether she could continue. That was the wrong question. He paused. The correct question was whether she could continue accurately. That line changed the fight in my memory. Because now I replayed it differently. Mera getting up was not the impressive part. Not alone. Plenty of species could rise after impact. Moridans especially were practically built from stubborn tissue. The impressive part was that after getting hit hard enough to dent wall padding, she still analyzed correctly. Still changed rhythm. Still adjusted sound. Still struck the same point. Still remembered the win condition. Not survival by rage. Survival by precision under damage. Professor Kelos stepped closer to Mera. You used vocal pattern interference. Yes, Professor. Human field method. Partly. Animal handling, predator deterrence, and old wilderness response training. Military? Mera shook her head. No, Professor. My grandmother kept rescue animals. The rail went silent again. Doyle muttered, Of course she did. Petra covered her mouth, but her shoulders moved once. I was beginning to understand that humans found some of this funny. That made everything worse. Kelos processed the answer. Your grandmother trained you to engage large predators. Mera seemed to consider the wording. She trained me not to panic around frightened animals. The Gorith was not frightened. No. But it was responding to uncertainty. That was enough to change timing. Professor Kelos looked at her for a long moment. Then he gave the smallest nod I had ever seen. Report to medical. Mera looked toward the Gorith. The handlers had secured it now. Its limbs were restrained, but its sensory organs still tracked her. For one moment, Mera's expression changed. Not pride. Not fear. Respect. She gave the creature a slight nod. Then she walked toward the exit gate. Only when she reached the gate did her right knee nearly fail. Doyle was already moving. Petra was faster. They caught her from both sides before she hit the floor. Mera made a quiet sound of irritation. I was walking. Doyle said, badly. Petra added, technically still walking, but trending downward. That was when the class finally breathed. Not normally. Not comfortably. But the spell broke enough for sound to return. Whispers started. Not mocking whispers this time. Calculation whispers. Correction whispers. The sound of 30 cadets updating internal files under stress. The Moridan who had said it was already over stared at Mera as Doyle and Petra helped her toward medical. His expression was not shame exactly. It was worse. Recalibration. The Krellians were already recording amended assessments. I saw one of them erase something from his slate. Not edit. Erase. That felt significant. Professor Kelos waited until Mera was gone. Then he turned to us. What you witnessed was not dominance. Nobody spoke. It was not superior strength. It was not invulnerability. It was not instinctive brilliance. His gold eyes swept the rail. It was decision continuity under biological protest. I wrote that down immediately. So did everyone else. Most species treat panic as failure, he continued. That is imprecise. Panic is a body attempting to preserve itself. Pain is a body reporting damage. Fear is a body forecasting consequence. These are useful signals. He paused. Cadet Shin received all three and did not allow any of them to become command authority. No one moved. No one wanted to be the first to break the silence. Kelos looked toward the empty arena gate where Mera had exited. That is rare. Coming from him, that was almost a hymn. Then he said the sentence that changed the academy more than the fight itself. The human did not defeat the Gorith because she was unafraid. His eyes returned to us. She defeated it because fear was present and subordinate. Medical Wing 3 became the most interesting room on Vorith within 12 minutes. That was not official. Officially, it was a restricted recovery area for injured cadets. Unofficially, half the academy wanted to know whether the quiet human girl who had dropped a Gorith was still alive, still conscious, and possibly available for questioning from a safe distance. Professor Keelos did not allow visitors. That was wise. If he had, the corridor outside Medical Wing 3 would have turned into a pilgrimage site, and the academy already had enough problems without religious movements forming around bruised second-year students. Narration sat on a recovery bed with one arm in a stabilizer, 3 sealed cuts across her shoulder, a rib compression wrap, and a medical technician looking personally offended by her pain tolerance. Doyle stood against the wall with his arms crossed. Petra sat in the chair beside the bed, tapping one finger against her knee again. That meant the universe had returned to a less alarming shape. I was not supposed to be there. I want that understood. I was sent by Professor Keelos to deliver the class assessment data slate to medical review, which technically required me to enter, hand it over, and leave. I did the first 2 things. The third became delayed by circumstances, curiosity, and possibly poor character. Mera looked up when I entered. Then, right? I nearly dropped the slate. She knew my name. This was unreasonable. I had spent 2 weeks being an observer. Observers are not supposed to be observed back. Yes, I said. Ven Soref. Doyle looked at me. You're the one who notices everything. That is both accurate and socially inconvenient. Petra smiled. Mera accepted the data slate from me with her uninjured hand. Professor Keelos sent this. Yes. Medical review copy. The technician tried to take it. Mera lifted it slightly out of reach. I can read. The technician's expression suggested this was not the first argument. You can also bleed internally while reading. I am not bleeding internally. You are not qualified to determine that. I am qualified to dislike waiting. Petra leaned toward me. She is a terrible patient. Doyle nodded. Historically. That word caught me. Historically. I looked at Mera again. She noticed. Of course she did. You're wondering how often I've done something like this. I froze. Petra's finger stopped tapping. Doyle sighed. Mera adjusted the stabilizer on her arm. Not arena fights. Before anyone makes that more dramatic than it was. More dramatic? Doyle said. You headbutted a predator classification event. I did not headbutt it. You looked like you considered it. That is not the same thing. Petra looked at me. Humans argue after almost dying. It helps restore emotional balance. I see, I said, though I did not. Mera looked down at the slate. My grandmother worked animal rescue in the coastal wild zones on Earth. Injured animals, aggressive animals, frightened animals. I helped when I was young. Doyle muttered, too young. Mera ignored him. Large animals do not become safer because you panic. Small ones either. Fear makes your body want to become loud, fast, unpredictable. Around frightened animals, that can get you hurt. I thought of the Gorith slowing on the 4th charge. The sound. The posture. The strange calm. So you learn to make fear quiet. Mera considered that. No. Fear is useful. You do not silence it. You lower its rank. There it was again. Fear present and subordinate. I wondered if Professor Keelos had understood the human lesson better than the humans had explained it. Mera continued. My grandmother used to say your body is allowed to vote, but it does not get command. Doyle pointed at her. That is such a Shen family sentence. Petra nodded. Violently practical. The medical technician began scanning Mera's ribs again. Mera winced once. Only once. The technician looked vindicated. Pain response detected. Mera gave him a flat look. I never claimed not to have one. That sentence stayed with me. Because after the assessment, some cadets had already begun making the wrong story. They were saying humans did not feel fear properly. That humans had unusual pain dulling. That Mera must have some neurological abnormality. That perhaps Earth had produced species-wide damage masking. All wrong. Conveniently wrong. Those explanations made humans easier to file away as biological oddities. But the truth was worse. Mera felt fear. Mera felt pain. Mera felt impact, disorientation, breathing disruption, and injury. She simply did not obey them automatically. That was not absence. That was hierarchy. Professor Kilos entered without knocking. The room changed immediately. Even the medical technician stood straighter. Mera tried to sit straighter too. Kilos pointed one long finger at her. Do not. She stopped. Smart. Kilos handed Petra a small black training recorder. Cadet Voss. Review this with Cadet Shen after recovery. Her fourth engagement timing was nearly late enough to fail. Petra accepted it. Yes, Professor. Doyle frowned. She won. Kilos turned one gold eye toward him. Winning is not evidence of optimal performance. Doyle opened his mouth. Closed it. A wise choice. Kilos looked at Mera. You will submit a written breakdown of your engagement decisions. Yes, Professor. Include the errors. Yes, Professor. And the Earth methods. Mera hesitated. Kilos noticed. Problem? Some are informal. Family taught. Not standardized. Then standardize them. That landed heavily. Mera looked at him. For the first time since I had known her, she seemed truly unsettled. Not by pain. Not by the Gorath. By being asked to translate instinct, memory, and family survival habits into something the Academy could study. Kilos continued. Your classmates saw an outcome. They did not understand the method. If they only remember the outcome, they will learn the wrong lesson. Mera was quiet. Then she nodded. Yes, Professor. Kilos turned to leave, then stopped. Cadet Shin. Yes. His voice lowered. Do not confuse being underestimated with being invisible. After today, you will not be the second. Then he left. No ceremony. No comfort. No praise in any recognizable shape. But Mera stared after him like he had handed her something difficult and valuable. Doyle broke the silence first. That was terrifyingly supportive. Petra resumed tapping. That may be his only mode of encouragement. I left shortly after because the technician began using phrases like mandatory rest and neural quiet, both of which sounded like things I should not be present for. In the corridor, the Academy had already changed. Not visibly. The walls were the same. The battle lights still flickered. The air still smelled faintly of burned armor and disinfectant. But cadets moved differently when humans passed. Not fearfully. Not exactly respectfully yet. Carefully. That is a different thing. Care is what happens when assumptions become expensive. The Moridan cadets stopped speaking when Doyle entered the dining hall that evening. Doyle noticed. He looked deeply uncomfortable with the silence and solved it by taking 2 trays of food instead of 1. Petra sat down across from him and began analyzing arena footage on a tablet while eating one-handed with terrifying efficiency. Mera arrived last, moving stiffly but without assistance. The dining hall noise dipped. Not stopped. Dipped. Enough for everyone to know everyone had noticed. Mera did not react. She took a tray, selected soup, bread, and something green that may have been food in a legal sense, then sat with Doyle and Petra. No performance. No challenge. No victory glow. She opened her notebook. With her uninjured hand, she began writing. That was the moment the new fear became clear. The fight had not made Mera strange. It had revealed that her ordinary had always contained something we had failed to measure. She was still quiet. Still diligent. Still sitting in the middle. Still writing by hand. Only now, every species in the room understood that stillness was not emptiness. It was storage. The Academy had spent 2 weeks looking at a closed door and calling it a wall. Professor Kilos proved this the next morning. He began class by displaying the footage of Mera's assessment. No introduction. No warning. Just the Gorath charging across the arena again. Mera moving toward it. Several cadets visibly tightened when the third impact threw her into the wall. Kilos paused the recording at the exact moment she started getting up. This, he said, is where most of you misunderstood the event. He turned to the class. You thought persistence began here. No one answered. It did not. He rewound the footage. Back to the first charge. Back to Mera stepping sideways and forward. Back to the first impossible choice. Persistence began before injury, Kilos said. Cadet Shin did not continue because she had been harmed. She had already decided on continuation before harm occurred. The room absorbed that slowly. Then he played the fight again. Frame by frame. Not as spectacle. As language. And for the first time, the class did not watch the quiet human girl as a surprise. We watched her as a lesson we should have started studying much earlier. Professor Kilos did not let the academy turn Narration into a myth. That would have been easier. Cadets love myths because myths require admiration but not improvement. If Mera became a story, then everyone could stand at a safe distance from what she had done. They could say she was special. They could say she was an exception. They could say Earth had produced one unusual human with rare instincts, strange training, and inconvenient pain tolerance. Then they could leave their assumptions mostly untouched. Kilos did not allow that. The next class began with the arena footage frozen on the first frame. Mera standing in the center. The Gorith just outside the creature gate. Timer at 8 minutes. Professor Kilos stood beside the display with his hands behind his back. Today, he said, you will explain what you failed to see. No one liked that sentence. It had the emotional warmth of a medical incision. He pointed to the frozen image. What was Cadet Shin's first advantage? A Krellian raised a hand. Prior exposure to large Earth predators. Incorrect. That created a small disturbance. Krellians dislike being wrong quickly. A Moridan tried next. Physical courage. Insufficient. A Tavari cadet said, calm under pressure. Closer. Still incomplete. Kilos turned one gold eye toward the human row. Doyle looked away immediately, which was not subtle. Petra smiled like she had seen a trap and approved of its construction. Mera, still bandaged, sat with her paper notebook open. She did not look pleased. She looked like someone being used as educational material while conscious. Kilos answered his own question. Her first advantage was that she did not assume the first interpretation of threat was complete. He played the footage. The Gorith charged. Mera moved sideways and forward. The room watched differently now. Not with shock. With hunger. Kilos paused the frame at the moment Mera entered the edge of the charge path. Most of you labeled this recklessness. Why? No one wanted to answer. So I did, because apparently my survival instinct had stepped out briefly. Because moving toward a larger threat contradicts standard preservation response. Kilos looked at me. Correct. And why was the standard response wrong here? I swallowed. Because the Gorith was predicting retreat. Kilos nodded once. That was, from him, a parade. Exactly. The creature's first attack was built around prey behavior. Cadet Shin did not overpower the charge. She invalidated the prediction. He let the sentence sit. Invalidated the prediction. Every cadet wrote it down. Even the Moridans. Especially the Moridans. Kilos continued through the footage. Frame by frame. Every motion that had looked impossible began to reveal itself as choice. Risky choice. Painful choice. Sometimes nearly catastrophic choice. But choice. The second dodge was not luck. It was a test of turn speed. The first strike was not desperation. It was nerve mapping. The vocal pattern was not instinctive noise. It was behavioral interference. The fourth engagement was not heroic endurance. It was controlled contact purchased for target access. By the end of the first hour, the class had stopped watching Mera as the quiet human who had done something shocking. We were watching a complete decision chain. That was worse. A miracle can be admired and dismissed. A decision chain can be studied. And if it can be studied, then the gap between what she did and what we failed to do becomes uncomfortable. Kilos closed the footage. Cadet Shin is not invulnerable. Mera said quietly, clearly. A few cadets almost laughed. Almost. Kilos ignored it. She is not stronger than the Gorith. She is not faster than the Gorith. She did not possess superior natural weapons, armor, reach, or mass. His gold eyes moved across us. And yet she controlled the engagement. He paused. Why? Petra raised her hand. Kilos nodded. She kept command authority internal. The phrase hit the room strangely. Kilos looked satisfied. Explain. Petra leaned back slightly. Her body reported danger. It reported pain. It reported fear. She acknowledged the reports, but none became command authority. Kilos's eyes shifted to Mera. Accurate. Mera nodded once. Mostly. Correction. Mera tapped her pen against the notebook. The body is part of command. Ignoring it completely gets people killed. It gives useful information. The mistake is letting it panic promote itself. Doyle muttered, panic promotion. That sounds like half the officers I've met. This time, several cadets did laugh. Quietly. Kilos allowed exactly 1 second of it. Then the room became serious again. He turned to the board and wrote 3 words. Signal. Interpretation. Authority. Pain is signal, he said. Fear is signal. Disorientation is signal. Exhaustion is signal. Your failure begins when signal becomes unquestioned authority. No one moved. Because every cadet in that room had felt the truth of it. In drills. In fights. In pressure tests. In moments when the body screamed stop and the mind obeyed before checking whether stop was correct. Kilos looked back at Mera. Humans appear unusually resistant to signal authority under specific conditions. Mera's expression tightened slightly. Some humans. Kilos accepted the correction. Some humans. But the pattern appears frequently enough in your species' combat and survival records to be operationally relevant. That sentence changed the air. Operationally relevant. Not inspiring. Not heroic. Relevant. The Academy did not deal in legends. It dealt in doctrine. And Professor Kilos had just moved humanity from curiosity to doctrine. He displayed a new file. Earth. Not the simplified Academy summary. A broader environmental and evolutionary profile. Predation density. Climate instability. Pathogen diversity. Endurance hunting history. Tool use under physical disadvantage. Group survival under ecological pressure. Long-term persistence strategies. Improvisational threat response. The class stared. The Earth file most of us had studied was short. Moderate death world. High biodiversity. Unusual endurance profile. Tool-dominant primates. Socially adaptive. That had seemed complete enough. It was not. Kilos highlighted one section. Classification systems often measure environment by present survivability. That misses historical selection pressure. He turned toward us. Earth is not impressive because it is the most lethal world currently inhabited by sentience. It is impressive because it spent billions of years filtering life through overlapping failure conditions. The display shifted. Predators. Cold. Heat. Disease. Competition. Scarcity. Injury. Long childhood dependency. Persistence hunting. Environmental uncertainty. Humanity, Kilos said, is not the strongest product of Earth. He looked directly at the Moridans. Not the fastest. The Tavari. Not the most armored. The Krellians. Not the most precise. Then the whole class. But it is a species whose ancestors survived by continuing under disadvantage longer than conditions expected them to. Mera looked down at her notebook. Not embarrassed exactly, but uncomfortable. As if being turned into species evidence was heavier than fighting the Gorath. I understood that. Or at least, I thought I did. Kilos continued. This does not make humans unbeatable. That is a childish conclusion. Doyle whispered, thank you. It makes them dangerous to misjudge. That was the sentence. The one everyone carried out of the room. Dangerous to misjudge. Not because every human would defeat every monster. Not because humans were secretly superior in all things. But because the visible measures were incomplete. Height. Strength. Armor. Speed. Social dominance. Initial performance metrics. All useful. All insufficient. especially with humans. Keelos ended the session by assigning every cadet a new analysis. Not of Mera's victory. Of our own assumptions before she raised her hand. That was cruel. Educationally valid, but cruel. We had to write down what we believed about humans at the start of the semester, what evidence we used, what evidence we ignored, and how those errors would have affected command decisions in field conditions. The Moridans hated the assignment. The Krellians hated it more. I hated it most because my paper was going to be excellent and personally humiliating. As we left the classroom, the academy had changed again. Not loudly. No one cheered for Mera. No one bowed dramatically. No one formed a human appreciation society, though I believe Doyle would have resigned from it immediately if they had. Instead, cadets made space differently. When Mera walked through the corridor, they did not scatter. They recalibrated. They noticed her. The paper notebook. The quiet eyes. The careful steps because her ribs were still injured. The lack of performance. And for the first time, the lack of performance itself became information. The Moridan who had said it was already over stopped beside her near the main stairs. The corridor slowed. Everyone pretended not to watch. He looked down at Mera. Then, with visible effort, lowered his head. "Cadet Shin," he said. "I misjudged." Mera looked up at him. "Yes." The Moridan blinked. Doyle covered his mouth. Petra looked delighted. After a moment, Mera added, "But you updated. That matters more." The Moridan processed this, then nodded again. "Then I will update further." He walked away. That became the new academy phrase within hours. Update further. It spread through training rooms, dining halls, simulation labs. Not as a joke exactly. As a warning. As a correction. As a reminder that being wrong was survivable if you stopped defending the error. That, more than the arena, was when the academy truly began learning from the quiet human. Because Narration had not only defeated the Gorath. She had forced the deadliest combat academy in the coalition to confront a more dangerous opponent. Its own certainty. The academy did not become kinder after that. That would be an inaccurate conclusion and also deeply unrealistic. The Interstellar Combat Academy on Vorath was still the kind of place where breakfast conversations included fracture statistics, threat matrices, and whether a training drone had technically violated safety doctrine by only almost removing someone's arm. Professor Keelos remained Professor Keelos. The corridors still smelled like burned synthetic armor. The battle lights still flickered during drills. The medical wing still kept stretchers close to the arenas because optimism, while admirable, was not policy. But something had changed. Not in the walls. In the measurements. Before Narration raised her hand, the academy measured cadets the way most institutions measure danger. Mass. Reach. Speed. Species classification. Combat tradition. Prior rank. Visible aggression. Confidence under observation. All useful data. All incomplete data. After Mera, every instructor quietly adjusted the human column in their assessment files. Not upward exactly. That would also be inaccurate. They adjusted it sideways. Because humans were not suddenly classified as the strongest species. They were not the fastest. They were not naturally armored, venomous, multilimbed, telepathic, or gifted with perfect recall. They did not belong at the top of the old chart. That was the point. The old chart was the problem. Humans required a different category. A category for species whose visible threat profile did not explain their survival behavior. A category for organisms that could be hurt, frightened, exhausted, outmatched, and still continue making decisions. A category for what Professor Keelos eventually called adaptive refusal. He wrote the phrase on the board during the final week of the unit. Adaptive refusal. Doyle stared at it for 5 full seconds. Then he leaned toward Petra and whispered, "That sounds like what my family calls being difficult." Petra whispered back, "Your family is correct but less publishable." Mera did not look up from her notebook. "I can hear both of you." "Yes," Doyle said. That was the risk. That was another thing the academy learned. Humans did not become more dramatic after being recognized. That somehow made them worse. If a Moridan dropped to Gorath, The story would become a 3-day celebration, 2 ceremonial oaths, and at least 1 song with too much percussion. If a Krellian had done it, there would have been a lecture series, annotated citations, and probably a revised probability model distributed before dinner. Mera went back to taking notes. By hand. With her ribs still taped and her shoulders still recovering. She continued sitting in the middle of the room. She continued asking maybe 1 question every other session. She continued being quiet enough that, if you had arrived late to the semester, you might have failed to understand why every serious cadet now tracked her movements from the corner of their vision. That was what stayed with me. Not the strike. Not the Gorath falling. Not even Professor Keelos saying humans had unusual override capacity. It was the return to ordinary. The fact that the most disruptive event in the course did not seem to change Mera's understanding of herself. Only ours. That is a difficult thing to explain to species who build identity around visible dominance. Mera did not need the room to know she was dangerous. The room needed to know. There is a difference. The final assignment of the unit was not combat. That surprised everyone. Professor Keelos brought us back to Arena 4, the same place where Mera had faced the Gorath, and had us stand along the observation rail. The floor below had been cleaned. The dent in the wall padding remained. No one had replaced it. I believe this was intentional. Keelos stood beneath the timer display. Most of you entered this unit believing combat performance could be predicted from known traits. He looked at the Moradans. Strength. The Krellians. Memory. The Tavari. Discipline. Then the humans. Stubbornness. Doyle nodded once, accepting this as fair. Keelos continued. Known traits matter. They do not complete the model. He gestured toward the dent in the padding. You saw a cadet struck hard enough to disrupt posture, breathing, and timing. Most of you interpreted that as loss. Some of you interpreted her rising as courage. He paused. Both interpretations were incomplete. The arena seemed very large around us. Courage is not rare, Keelos said. Many species possess courage. Some possess it in abundance. Courage makes you enter the arena. His gold eyes shifted to Mera. It does not tell you what to do after the first mistake. That sentence landed quietly. Mera's expression did not change, but her pen stopped moving. Keelos looked back at the class. What Cadet Shen demonstrated was not the absence of fear. It was disciplined continuation while fear remained active. That distinction will decide whether you survive command. Command. Not combat. That widened the lesson. Because suddenly this was not about one cadet and one beast. It was about every future battlefield where someone would be tired, frightened, injured, wrong, and still responsible for the next decision. Keelos climbed the arena steps slowly and stopped at the rail. You will all misjudge something eventually. A threat. An ally. A subordinate. Yourself. His voice lowered. The danger is not the first error. The danger is defending it because your pride dislikes revision. No one looked at the Moradans. No one needed to. They looked at themselves. So did I. My first assessment of Mera had been clean, organized, and wrong. Quiet equaled background. Paper notes equaled inefficiency. Low social display equaled low threat. Average visible strength equaled average combat relevance. Every line had been logical. Every line had been incomplete. That was the humiliating part. Bad assumptions are easy to reject when they are obviously foolish. The dangerous ones are reasonable until reality hits them in the ribs. Narration had been that reality. After class, I found her in the outer corridor, sitting on a bench beneath a heating vent that clicked every 12 seconds. She had her notebook open. Of course. I stood nearby for 3 seconds too long, which is the universal sign of someone preparing a question they have overthought. Mera did not look up. You can ask. I sat beside her. Were you afraid? She continued writing for a moment. Then stopped. Yes. The answer came so easily that I almost missed its weight. During the first charge. Before that. In the arena. In the classroom. That surprised me. When you volunteered. Yes. Then why raise your hand? Mera closed the notebook. For the first time, she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with injury. Because everyone was waiting for someone else to do it. I had no response to that. She looked through the corridor window toward the Vorath Highlands, where the wind moved grey snow sideways across the rocks. On Earth, that gets people killed. The sentence was simple. Not heroic. Not dramatic. A rule learned somewhere practical and unforgiving. I thought of Earth then. Not as the Academy file described it. Not moderate death world. Not tool-dominant primates. Not endurance profile. I thought of a planet spending billions of years saying stop. Too cold. Too hot. Too infected. Too wounded. Too hungry. Too dangerous. Too late. And life answering, not elegantly, not always wisely, but persistently. No. Not yet. That was the human word hidden beneath everything. Not yet. The Gorith charges. Not yet. The body hurts. Not yet. The room goes quiet. Not yet. Everyone looks away. Not yet. That is what humans brought into the Academy. Not supremacy. Something more unsettling. Continuation. The willingness to remain in the problem after every sensible system has recommended exit. The universe, I think, does not know what to do with that. We certainly did not. By the end of the semester, nobody mocked the humans. Not openly. Not quietly. Not even the Moradans, who had developed a new habit of asking Doyle to review close-quarters improvisation drills and pretending it was not respect. The Krellians began adding uncertainty margins to human behavior models. Petrus said this was the nicest thing they had ever done for another species. Mera continued taking notes. And Professor Kilos updated the official Practical Combat Engagement course file. Under human species considerations, he added one line. Do not assume termination of function because discomfort, fear, or injury has begun. That was all. One line. Dry. Clinical. Academy language. But everyone who had watched Arena 4 understood what it really meant. If the quiet human is still breathing, the event is not over. And perhaps that was the true lesson. Not that humans cannot be beaten. They can. Not that humans do not break. They do. Not that humans are fearless. They are not. The lesson was worse. Humans can be afraid, wounded, outmatched, and wrong. And still update. Still move. Still choose. Still raise their hand when the room goes silent. That is what Narration taught us in 5 minutes and 40 seconds. That is what Earth had taught her long before we met her. And that is what the Interstellar Combat Academy on Vorath is still trying to properly classify. So let me leave you with the question that has bothered me ever since. Was Narration exceptional? Or was she simply the first human we had watched closely enough to understand? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more powerful HFY stories, Alien Academy legends, Death World human dominance, and quiet characters who change the rules without saying much, subscribe to the channel and stay locked in. Because in this universe, the most dangerous human is not always the loudest one. Sometimes it is the one sitting quietly in the middle of the room, waiting for everyone else to realize the fight already started.